PTSD today is an issue that 7 to 8% of our population will face in their lifetime, and yet in servicemen and women that number is drastically larger. Depending on which war and the length of their tour, the number of PTSD cases in the Gulf War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and the Vietnam War range from 11 to 30% in combat veterans. Although the number of cases has increased, it does not necessarily mean there are more servicemen and women who have PTSD than before. Cases in earlier wars were rarely reported, and if they were, most medical personnel didn't know what PTSD was or how to treat it. From a lack of knowledge and understanding, a stigma arose around mental health, especially within the military. This stigma and discrimination is still very much apparent today, but is being targeted by many sizable mental health organizations, such as Mental Health America and the National Alliance on Mental Health, in attempts to get the people who are hurting the treatment they so badly need. As a nation, we have increased our knowledge and understanding about the signs and symptoms of PTSD. Many families have identified and relocated lost ancestors who were shunned or forgotten due to their battle with the disease. Throughout this school year, we have discussed and covered many topics surrounding causation and consequence. I believe both of these are incredibly evident in the current issues surrounding veteran PTSD and the reclaiming of familial ancestors. By going off to fight, young men during the Civil War were woefully unprepared for the toll the battle would take on both their minds and bodies. Due to their service, many of them developed symptoms of what is now known as PTSD, and as an effect of their behaviors, many were sent to insane asylums until the day they died. Their abrupt separation from families and eventual passing at asylums caused families to forget or disown their members. All of these events showcase causation and the consequences of wars on individuals and their families. As we move forward with these issues, it is essential to understand the basics of what PTSD is. Post-traumatic stress disorder is defined as a chronic psychological disorder that can develop after exposure to a traumatic event. A traumatic event is described as an incident that has caused physical, emotional, spiritual, or psychological harm to a patient. PTSD can affect anyone, not just combat veterans, but the likelihood of a veteran developing PTSD is much higher than an average citizen. Before PTSD had its official term, it went by many different names and it had different symptoms. Pre-Civil War, it was referred to as railway spine or exhaustion. As our country waged war with itself during the Civil War, it got the name of soldier or irritable heart, and was often characterized by racing or weak heartbeats, sweating, chest pain, and was thought to be caused by a knapsack being too tight across the chest. During World War I and II, it was called by many names, mainly shell shock or battle fatigue. As our country joined the controversial Vietnam War, it began going by the name of post-Vietnam syndrome. However, finally, in 1980, after years of research, it was reclassified as a new condition which was given the name of post-traumatic stress disorder. As mentioned earlier, during the Civil War, many members of the armed forces suffered symptoms of PTSD that were not diagnosed, and those that acted irrationally were shipped off to asylums for treatment of a disease no one understood. Although PTSD didn't enter the medical dictionaries until 1980, its symptoms, including flashbacks, panic attacks, insomnia, and suicidal thoughts, turned up frequently among Civil War soldiers, especially those who were admitted into the asylums. An example case was of a man who was shot during the war and insisted that he was still bleeding. The asylum wrote he was bleeding to death from imaginary wounds. The Government Hospital for the Insane in Washington, now known as St. Elizabeth, holds many letters written from families confused and hurting about their loved ones within the asylum. A daughter wrote to her father, "If he does know anything at times, please tell him his daughter has written to you about him and also give him my love." The unknown disease ripped families apart, and many disowned or covered up their shameful family members in hopes to move past it. However, nowadays, as the stigma is being addressed and some of the earliest American cases of PTSD are being identified with roots in the Civil War, families are attempting to reconcile and reclaim their ancestors. There are many cases like that of Gail Palmer, whose ancestor was a Civil War veteran named Oliver Perry Chappell. Gail addressed the issue by saying, "Whatever Chappell's mental state was, we are proud to welcome him back to the family." She also addressed the issues surrounding Civil War PTSD as a whole, and saying that maybe, finally, we're far enough away from the Civil War to tell the painful stories that families like mine covered up. Mental health was and still is often misunderstood, and that contributes to its stigmatization. As we begin the long journey of removing the stigma around PTSD, we are forcing our nation and hundreds of families to reevaluate areas of the Civil War once thought to be settled in history books. Controversy today surrounding veterans' health care serves as a reminder that mental health care providers still struggle to detect and effectively treat PTSD among combat veterans. We can all do our part to help with veteran PTSD by making donations or volunteering, but arguably the most significant contribution we can all make is to keep an open mind and understand that post-traumatic stress disorder is a real injury and that not all wounds are visible.